A catastrophic internal failure tears through one of the Maybach V16 engines, and the locomotive is suddenly out of the game. These locomotives were still relatively new by railroad standards, and they were not cheap experiments for Southern Pacific. Southern Pacific was already moving toward retiring and scrapping the fleet. By 1968, at Roseville, California, Southern Pacific was watching its diesel hydraulic experiment begin to unravel. But the real story started earlier in the 1960s, when these German-built units arrived and turned heads. In 1961, the first batch of Krauss-Maffei diesel hydraulics arrives in the US, and the railroad press reacts with intense enthusiasm. They offered about 4,000 horsepower on paper, coming from two high-revving Maybach 516 engines paired with a hydraulic transmission. Compared to many US road units in service then, the German numbers looked brutally impressive on horsepower alone, and on paper, Krauss-Maffei appeared to leap ahead of American builders. Southern Pacific bought German locomotives because Union Pacific was destroying them. Around that period, Union Pacific was aggressively increasing available horsepower across its fleet, and Southern Pacific felt the pressure to answer. Southern Pacific believed it needed a serious horsepower jump to stay competitive. Their F7s maxed out at 1,500 horsepower, which meant they needed 10 locomotives per freight train just to move tonnage. Krauss-Maffei said they had the answer. Two engines driving hydraulic transmissions straight to the wheels, with no generators, no traction motors, and none of the heavy electrical equipment that wastes energy. Krauss-Maffei promoted diesel hydraulic as a more direct and weight-efficient alternative to diesel-electric transmission. The specifications looked unbeatable. Two Maybach V16 engines, commonly cited at roughly 2,000 horsepower each depending on source and rating method, fed Voith hydraulic transmissions for a nominal total of approximately 4,000 horsepower. Published specifications emphasized unusually high starting and continuous tractive effort for the era. Total weight was 344,000 pounds, and in some comparisons the power-to-weight ratio appeared favorable. Early reports from railroad crews were extremely positive. Contemporary crew anecdotes described the ML-4000 as feeling like two units in one when operating properly. The hydraulic transmission delivered full torque at startup without the wheel slip problems that plagued diesel-electric locomotives. Denver and Rio Grande Western took delivery of 3 cab units and immediately threw them into mountain service between Denver and Salt Lake City. Steep, sustained grades and long tunnels, exactly where that extra horsepower should dominate. 3 years later, Rio Grande sold all 3 units to Southern Pacific. The problem was tunnels. Krauss-Maffei designed the cab units with air intakes mounted high on the roof, which worked fine in Europe. In Denver and Rio Grande Western service, multiple accounts point to persistent cooling and airflow problems, particularly in tunnel territory. Rio Grande's shops tried installing external air ducts running down the car body sides to pull cooler air from track level. These modifications helped somewhat, but did not fully resolve the issue. By 1964, Rio Grande ultimately disposed of its 3 units, and they were transferred to Southern Pacific. Some engineers argued they did not perform any better than the newly arriving EMDGP-30 locomotives, which did not require special mechanics. Southern Pacific looked at Rio Grande's complete failure and ordered 15 more units anyway. These were hood units with conventional American road switcher design. Krauss-Maffei incorporated taller exhaust vents to minimize the air intake problems. All 15 arrived in 1964, bringing Southern Pacific's total fleet to 21. The railroad invested in specialized maintenance infrastructure at Roseville and brought German technical staff to California. The locomotives ran mostly in California's San Joaquin Valley, between Fresno and Bakersfield, flat territory with no sustained grades and no long tunnels. For a while, this actually worked. Then the cardan shafts started failing. These were the drive shafts connecting the hydraulic transmission to the wheels, essentially giant universal joints spinning at high speed under massive torque loads. Some of those shafts ran directly under the cab floor, and engineers knew exactly what would happen if one failed at speed. A failed shaft under load could whip violently, and engineers feared it might come through the cab floor, posing a serious safety risk to the crew. The Maybach engines had their own issues. They had 16 cylinders running at 1,500 revolutions per minute, significantly faster than American medium-speed engines that ran at 800 to 900 revolutions per minute. These engines required more frequent and precise maintenance than most American railroad shops were accustomed to. When something broke, the railroad waited for components from Germany. Maintenance costs started exceeding whatever operational benefits the extra horsepower provided. Here is the timing that destroyed them. By the mid-1960s, EMD introduced the SD-45, offering 3,600 horsepower in a conventional diesel-electric package with widespread parts support. Parts were available everywhere, mechanics were already trained, and no special facilities were required. By 1966, Southern Pacific started ordering SD-40 and SD-45. The SD-40 delivers 3,000 horsepower from a proven 16-cylinder engine. EMD had caught up, and General Electric was building the U-33C at 3,300 horsepower. American manufacturers were now meeting Southern Pacific's horsepower needs without the added complexity of hydraulics. February 13, 1968, Southern Pacific announced the end of their diesel hydraulic program. Any unit requiring major repair was retired immediately. By the end of the year, every ML-4000 was being scrapped at Associated Metals in Sacramento. Alco also tried building American diesel hydraulics. The DH-643 had twin 12-cylinder engines and a German Voith transmission, producing 4,300 horsepower. Southern Pacific bought 3 in 1964. They survived longer than the Krauss-Maffei units, but were ultimately retired as well. Some engineers argued the diesel hydraulic concept was fundamentally sound. German locomotives worked well in Europe, where Deutsche Bahn ran thousands reliably for decades. Critics said American operating practices and maintenance realities were less compatible with high-speed hydraulic designs. Others said it was market forces. By 1968, EMD controlled a dominant share of the U.S. locomotive market, and a foreign manufacturer showing up with superior technology was a direct threat. Southern Pacific claimed only one recorded failure during regular service, but multiple documented cases exist. Testing records and later accounts describe episodes of severe wheel slip and mechanical stress. The locomotives were rated at 4,000 horsepower, but reported output in service often fell closer to 3,000 to 3,400 horsepower. Southern Pacific 9010 survives as the only one. The Pacific Locomotive Association bought it in 2008 after it sat outside for decades. Restoration required sourcing rare components internationally, including driveline parts rebuilt overseas. February 14, 2017. The rear Maybach fires up for the first time in 49 years. It runs for 16 minutes with clean exhaust and a smooth idle. By 2019, Southern Pacific 9010 was appearing in limited Niles Canyon Railway operations, while restoration work continued. It was often highlighted as the sole surviving Southern Pacific Krauss-Maffei. Everyone who sees it running asks why this one works perfectly if the design was so flawed. Maybe they were not flawed, and the timing just killed them. EMD caught up too fast with the SD-45. Or maybe diesel hydraulic was always wrong for America. The Germans built precision machines while Americans needed workhorses. 21 locomotives over 7 years, all scrapped. Nobody tried diesel hydraulics again. But Southern Pacific 9010 is still running in Niles Canyon. Everything Southern Pacific said was unreliable is working 50 years later. Maybe they scrapped them too soon.